Good morning. Today we will talk about class struggle, CGT, and about the future of the Europe. I'm Axel and today we will talk with Axel Persson, the secrétaire général du CGT, Confédération Générale du Travail. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I want to tell about something about you. Who is the Axel Persson?
Well, my name is, as you said, Axel Persson. I'm 32 years old. I'm a train driver in France. And as you mentioned, I am the General Secretary of the CGT Railway Workers Branch in Trappes, which is a city in the southwestern suburbs of Paris that was built around its train yard. It's a railway city. And I've been working in the railway for the past 13 years now. And I would also define myself, of course, as a worker, but first and foremost as a Marxist and a communist.
Okay. What means for you the class struggle in Europe? For you, class struggle exists?
Yeah, of course, class struggle exists. In my opinion, class struggle is a scientific fact. It's not an abstract theory in which you can choose to believe or not to believe. It's very much like gravity. For example, you could say that you do not believe in the theory of gravity, but if you go out on the balcony and you jump out of the balcony and say, I do not believe in the theory of gravity, gravity will not care about that. You will still fall to the ground and probably hurt yourself a lot, eventually even die. So it's the same thing with class struggle. Class struggle is the history of to existing society. It is how society is divided and based upon class, and as such, within those societies, class struggle exists, of course, and the question is, are you conscious about it? Because if you're not conscious about it, you'll only be a tool in the hands of others who are well aware of their own class interests and will use the system to their advantage. So in my opinion, yeah, of course, class struggle exists, and it is one of our main tasks as activists to rebuild class consciousness in order for workers to be aware of the society in which they live in, to be aware of what interests they have in this society, and to be able to distinguish between their class brothers and sisters and their class enemies in order to defend their interests, and also to build a society that works for the interests of their own class and not for the tiny minority that rules the entire world, not only in Europe actually, but in the entire world.
What means for you to be secretary at CGT? I saw that, and I know that CGT was made a lot of many protests in solidarity with Cuba and Venezuela.
Yeah, of course. As you know, well, of course, it's a title to be General Secretary, but I don't usually go around and say I'm a General Secretary of something because that's a bit pompous. I'm first and foremost a worker, an activist, and I am no different from all my other brothers and sisters, be it in the railway where I work or other workers in other companies. You mentioned international solidarity because, of course, the CGT as a trade union, it's the oldest trade union in France that was historically formed in 1895, so it's over 120 years old, and it was formed in the beginning as a merger of all the existing trade unions at the time. It was heavily influenced in its beginnings by anarcho-syndicalists, and a bit later in its history it became heavily dominated by communists, even though, of course, not all members are communists, but the leadership has been very much influenced by the communist tradition, the Marxist tradition in France. And as such, what comes as a practical conclusion is that as a trade union, we of course have a role within our companies to defend the immediate interests of the workers, for example, such as in terms of wages, pensions, working conditions, terms and conditions. But we as Marxists, what we aim to do is also to bring about a new order of society, a socialist order of society, where workers who produce the wealth constitute the majority of the workforce, constitute even the majority of the population, but have no political power, have no control over the wealth they produce in their own companies. So as such, what we want to aim and achieve is not only defend the immediate interests of the workers on a day-to-day basis, but also to do what is necessary to bring about a revolutionary change in the entire society where workers will conquer power and exert political power, not only in the workplace, but in the entire society. And in order to achieve that, we of course have to be active within the workplaces, but since our enemies, our class enemies, are organized internationally, we also have to organize internationally, because they, in order to maintain their domination, in order to defend their power, they have institutions such as like the European Union, NATO, they have even to some extent the World Bank, the IMF. They have loads of institutions, loads of alliances that run across the globe and share one thing in common, is to be able to maintain the domination of the tiny minority that constitutes the ruling class. And it may sound very ambitious, but we as revolutionary activists, in my opinion at least, also therefore have to have an international strategy in order to be able to conquer power and defeat our enemies, because it will only be achievable in the long term if we organize internationally. And that is why also you will see the CGT active, of course, in all fronts in the workplaces, but also active in the international field and in solidarity with our comrades, for example, as you mentioned, in Cuba or in Venezuela, but also, of course, our friends and brothers and sisters in Palestine and in the Middle East, in Asia, because despite our differences, despite the fact that there are, of course, differences between people and workers from all across the world, in the end, we have the same interest and we constitute the one and same class despite our differences, and as such must fight together.
Okay, and the last question is, what is your perspective about the future?
Well, it's a vast question, as you say, but
it's more abstract.
Our modest goal, I think, would be to be able, from an abstract question, to put some concrete perspectives at hand. And the situation right now in Europe, it's not only true in Europe, it's true in the United States, is that the situation is difficult for working class people. It's difficult for our class because we have been retreating for the past 20 or 30 years or so, for many different reasons we may not have the time to talk about now. But you can see that in Europe, for example, you can see it in the United States, you also see it in other countries. The far right is on the rise. You see that reactionary forces, racism, that is not something new, of course, because capitalism has built itself in a large part on the history of racism, of course, so it's not something new. But you see that the far right, these reactionary elements are on the rise again, be it in the United States, be it in Europe, and that collective labor organizations are globally retreating. So we, as activists for the future, we really need to focus on rebuilding class consciousness, going back to basics, building international solidarity, building class struggle within the workplaces, and of course be able to present a political alternative to the main narrative that is being fed by the mainstream media, by the bourgeoisie, by the bosses, by the employers, that are basically telling us either there is no alternative to what we have, or if you have difficulties, it is because of not because of us, but because of either, I don't know, somebody with another religion, somebody with another skin color, or somebody in another country. But all our enemies, most of our enemies are in our own countries, and they are organizing internationally together to crush all of us all across the world. So that is a task, I think, that is at hand in front of us, our perspective. And in order to achieve that, of course, I don't have all the answers, because this is a collective answer that we must bring forth. But we really need, I think, in order to be able to regain the ground that we have lost, be able to rebuild the international links, the international solidarity. That was the hallmark of the communist movement, despite all its flaws during the past century. But one of its strongest features and its greatest strength was that it was organized internationally and had an international vision and able to organize across the borders. And that is something we have much less now than what we had before. But our enemies, they are doing it on a much more efficient way than what we are doing now. And so in short, yeah, I would say that the perspective would be to be able to rebuild the perspectives that have been lost, to be able to make workers, make our friends, our comrades, able to believe once again that another world is possible. Because another world is not only possible, but given the climate crisis, given the crisis of capitalism, given how this COVID crisis has highlighted the huge class differences and how the entire world is run according to only the specific interest of a very tiny minority of people in this globe. Not only is another world possible, but it is absolutely necessary, not only to save it from its own destruction. So Rosa Luxemburg famous revolutionary from Germany that you are of course familiar with, used to say that the alternative is between socialism and barbarism. And I think in 2021 that is still as true as it was in 1920.
Thank you so much for this interview.
Mulțumesc. Thank you for inviting me.